Welcome to the Dog Storytime Podcast. If you'd like to hear the amazing stories of the dogs in our lives, this is the show for you. From the heartwarming to the head-tilting, we share the stories of dog owners and their furry family members. And now your host, luxury fine art pet photographer and puppy whisperer, Kimberly Sarah Bucari.
Hello, everyone. This is Kimberly Sarah Bucari, and welcome to the Dog Storytime Podcast. Today's guest is our good friend, Lindsay Hamrick. Lindsay is the Policy Director for Companion Animals for the Humane Society of the United States. She's also a trail runner by day and a dog snuggler by night, but we know her as the crazy chicken lady. Lindsay will be speaking to us about her latest awesome foster dog, Samwise Hamgee, and giving us an update on the CDC guidelines regarding COVID-19 and your pets. Here we go. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for being on the show today. So, of course, the world is out there doing their thing. It is April 6th when we're recording this at a very safe and social distance. So we're each at our homes. And, Lindsay, what story is it you want to tell us today?
Hey, thanks for having me. I want to chat today about a foster dog that I have whose name is Samwise Hamgee.
Okay, Samwise Hamgee. So the name comes from what?
So originally his real life name is Sammy, but I try to always give a little bit of a twist when they go into foster care. And Samwise Gamgee is a character in Lord of the Rings that I am obsessed with, but I changed it to Hamgee because of my last name.
Excellent. So we'll get into the story, but you need to tell us the other names of your pack. Tell us who you live with in that little household.
Yes. So I have 3 of my own dogs who are permanent residents, and that is Nova and Sir Finnegan Xavier McCool III, also known as Finn.
So handsome.
So handsome. And then Grandma Baguette, who is named after a piece of bread because that's what she looks like.
She does. She's a Chihuahua. Is that right?
She is.
She is.
She has a grayish stripe on her back, so she looks like a moldy piece of bread sometimes. I mean that in a loving
Very
fashion.
tempting. Yes, very tempting.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And you have some chickens.
I
roosters.
do. I have a flock of chickens. 3 of them were rescued from a very large cockfighting cruelty case in Massachusetts a couple of summers ago. So the rooster and 2 hens are from that case. And then I have 3 quote unquote normal hens who just had to be rehomed. So they're more normal.
Okay. And do they all get along? The rescued ones and they get along okay?
They do.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah,
the animal shelter that helped rescue them, they did evaluations of all of the roosters from the case, and there were a significant number who were safe enough to be placed as pets and in flocks. And I've never had any issues introducing hens to him. He does a really great job protecting them.
Right. Okay.
So him and I have some disagreements sometimes, but that's pretty normal rooster behavior.
Sure. Excellent. Very good. It's amazing that you have all these animals. I know you're a very busy woman doing the work that you do. Just lightly tell us what it is that you do for work, Lindsay.
Sure. So I spent a little over a decade working directly in animal shelters. A lot of behavior work. I'm a professional dog trainer, although I don't do anything with that for profit. And now I work for the Humane Society of the United States, and my job is to monitor public policy, so local state laws that impact pets, which in turn also supports what the shelters and rescues are doing. So any kind of law that might either help the work that they do or hinder the work that they do, we would be a resource for them.
Interesting. And so that must keep you really busy because there's a lot going on in that arena. I mean, it's, not only are there front line stories front page stories, I should say, but there's also things that have probably been going on for years. Is that right?
Yeah, it's got a lot to it. So, anything that the culture as a whole is experiencing ultimately trickles down into how we can care for our pets. And so my organization does a lot with people who are experiencing poverty. And we know that there's, a lot of pets that are in loving homes that cannot access veterinary care and other kinds of pet services. And, the sheltering community, in my opinion, they're really an extension of social services. So anybody who needs the services of a shelter, they probably have needed access to other human-based social services as well. And the sheltering community has changed so much over the last, couple of decades, where we really are trying to reach people in the community before they reach a point of crisis.
That's wonderful.
What that crisis looks like changes all the time. So
Sure. Well, keep up the good work. We need more people like you doing what you do. You're a real hero to us. So thank you. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy days, even though we are in quarantine, so to speak. I know you get to do a lot of work from home, and you're still making a difference no matter where you are. So let's talk about Samwise. Go ahead.
Sure. So, so I have always tried to fill a niche in fostering where I've taken in a number of dogs who would be sort of considered to be in hospice situations, where, the veterinary community sort of makes an assumption based on some health diagnoses that the dog may not have more than like 6 months or so to live. Although in my experience, the dogs always lie about that.
Right.
so
the better home they go to, and especially with you, they're like, yeah, I'm going to stick it out.
They sure do. So my last hospice dog, she was only supposed to be alive for a few months, and she made it about a year and a half,
my goodness.
which was awesome, because then that meant that we got to spend time with her. So Samwise is not a traditional hospice dog, but he had been at the local shelter for a little over a month and had clearly some very complicated medical issues. So he was really underweight and not able to put weight on. And so before the COVID-19 crisis, sort of right as it was starting to increase, I had been looking actively for another foster dog. And then when COVID really hit the sheltering community in terms of how to prepare for whatever's to come, there was a big push by shelters and rescues all over the country to try to increase the number of animals in foster homes. And so I went to meet him, and I brought one of my dogs to go meet him, and he was just a perfect fit. And so he's been here about 2 weeks now, as we sort through his medical stuff.
Right. Wonderful. So tell us, how do you integrate a dog that's new to your family?
That's a great question.
It's funny, a lot of people don't know how to do that. It's not easy.
No, and I sometimes I forget after doing this for so long that I have such a system that I forget what it took in the beginning when I first started fostering to figure that system out. But I used to have a dog who was really selective about which dogs she liked, and so it forced me to do really slow introductions in my home because I couldn't rush it because she would not tolerate that. Now I have a group of dogs where literally a new dog walks in and they go back to sleep because they're just very well-adjusted dogs and they're used to this process. But I still don't rush it because I've found over the years that the foundation you create in the beginning really sets the tone for however long you're going to have that foster dog. And sometimes it could just be a few weeks that he's going to be here, or it could be months or over a year. And I also, in all the years of working with shelter dogs, I know that, sometimes they transition into a home and they may have actually had some behavioral challenges in the shelter that they don't have in a home because they're less stressed. And I've also seen the opposite, where a dog looked, behaviorally very sound in the shelter and then came into the home environment and gets comfortable and some little quirks start to come out. So my general thing is I do assessments off-site. So I always do a dog introduction at the shelter with at least one of my dogs.
So where the shelter dog feels at least a little bit safer because he knows his environment. Is that right? Is that one of the reasons?
Yeah, and it's a neutral territory, so it's not for my dogs, not that they ever have any issues anyway, but they're not going to bring out any of their weirdness either.
Okay.
And I can see a lot just in two dogs meeting for the first time. Does the shelter dog like rush right up to my dog, or is it much more low key? That's pretty indicative. And I also take really lazy dogs because we have a very lazy household, and that's how I like it. Like I want my dogs sleeping like 20 hours a day because I work from home and I can't have a lot of chaos. So I start with pretty lazy dogs. And as long as the introduction goes well at the shelter, I live alone. So 3 of my dogs are over 70 pounds. So I am cognizant that as a small woman who's living alone, that if a dog fight were to break out, I know how to handle it, but under no circumstances do I want to encourage that from happening.
Right. Exactly.
And so I want everybody to be totally bored with each other and totally uninterested. And I do that just by separating throughout the household with just basic baby gates or an X pen where they can clearly see each other and interact, but they can't
get to each other.
Physically get to each other. Right.
Right. That's wonderful. And is that the way that it should be done, or is this just something that you figured out on your own? I assume that there's a lot of people during this time to help out the shelters that are thinking about fostering. And most people who would think about that probably have a dog or two of their own. Is this information that they can find somewhere, Lindsay, or is it just kind of you do what works, or how would you recommend people go about doing that?
Yeah, for me, I think it is always helpful to do it this way. And with dogs who are going to get along, you're maybe separating them for 2 days. So it's not this really long drawn out process. If you're trying to integrate a dog that maybe is picky about other dogs, then it could be a 3 to 4 week process. But most of these dogs that are, that the general public is fostering, unless the shelter has said otherwise, you're talking about dogs who are probably pretty social with other dogs. And each shelter or rescue would have resources and tools to help the person guide them through that introductory period as well. But I just find even with dogs who are ultimately going to get along beautifully, everyone needs to feel safe. And just if we threw a big party and somebody barged into our house and was, for me as an introvert, it was super loud and slamming glasses down. I don't know, whatever crazy alternatives there are. Our stress levels would rise. And I think it may not result in a fight, but why raise the energy level that high?
Yeah, exactly. Very good. So how is Samwise? He's been there for how long now, Lindsay?
He's been here about 2 weeks now.
Okay. And is he putting weight on?
We're getting there. Yeah. So what we think is going on, so the options, he had a lot of different options, but one of the reasons we thought he might have been a hospice dog is there's a chance he's got some lymphoma, some cancer happening that's preventing him from putting weight on. But what we now think is happening after some testing is he's got a combination of some IBD, so irritable bowel syndrome.
Sure, yeah.
And so we've got him on some medications that help with that, and he's on a very bland, strict diet to help him with that digestive stuff. And so over the last week, since we figured out that formula, he's been doing better. And it's hard when you are with a dog every day to figure out if they're gaining weight. But
right, because it's so gradual. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So he's going to a veterinarian every week to 2 weeks to get reevaluated and weighed and all that good stuff.
Excellent. Excellent. Very good.
Yeah, so he's really good.
Well, when his skinny jeans don't fit anymore, then that's a really good sign.
That's the hope.
Right?
And he already has lots of interest in him. So once we get him on the road to recovery, then I think he's going to find a really awesome home.
That's great. What else would you like to tell us about him or his story? Or
yeah, I have been an advocate for breeds of dogs that tend to be banned or restricted in some way. I actually purchased my house in part because I was fostering an American Pit Bull Terrier, and my landlord's insurance company wouldn't allow her. And from a policy perspective, it's one of those issues that I work on. And Samwise is absolutely, I mean, there's no way around it. He's clearly, an American Pit Bull.
You can't pass him off for anything else.
No, he just like my other dog. He is very clearly from that line. And, his family who needed to surrender him to the shelter, they did so because they had to move and they couldn't find anywhere to live with him. And that is so common, not just for the breeds that are restricted, but for many pet owners that, during times of financial stress, when people don't have the money to pay their mortgages or pay the rent where they are, and they start looking for new housing, the pet restriction or pet prohibition issue is really, it's typically the number one reason we see folks surrender pets.
Yeah, and right, and it's hard because people, I think most people want to do the right thing, right? They try to find housing that can accommodate them, but then they're at some point you have to make that decision. Do we have a place to live, but we can't keep the dog? So what do you do? I mean, your heart has to break for some of those folks that need to make that decision and don't have a choice. Do you think that we will, from COVID-19, that we will see an influx of these type of scenarios happening at the shelters?
So the initial data just in the last few weeks is that we're unlikely to see like a mass surrender of pets because they're worried, because owners are worried about the virus in their own animals, which is good. Right. What we do anticipate is with any financial downturn, the recession in 2008 and 2009, there was not just increase in surrenders for housing issues or people literally just didn't have the money to care for a pet or they can't access affordable veterinary care. But we also saw a stalling of adoptions because if you don't have any money coming in, you're not going to add another pet to your household. So we've learned a lot in the 10 years since that recession. And so the shelters are really just trying to ramp up. How can we support pet owners so that they have what they need to not have to surrender their animals? And that means access to pet food, and it means access to veterinary care right now. And then long term, certainly the housing issue is going to play a big role.
Wonderful. So how do you know how people would go about getting any assistance if they needed it?
Yeah, I know in New Hampshire, and across the country, a lot of local shelters have ramped up their pet food pantries. So if pet food is the immediate issue, contact your local shelter. They've set them up in most places in a way that you can socially distance so that you can access it outdoors. You don't have to go into the actual building to get the food that you need. Yes. And then on the vet care side, a lot of states, this is an issue we're working on currently, a lot of states are allowing veterinarians to provide telehealth. So it's not common in the veterinary field in a way that it has been sort of common in the human health medicine fields, but it's getting approved, and that means that veterinarians can offer some assistance, especially for, things that aren't immediately an emergency.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a real game changer, particularly for folks who live in areas that just don't have access to veterinary care. Being able to access somebody online is going to be huge. And hopefully that continues to be a resource after these emergency orders are lifted, because it's going to be a need for a while.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we will see a lot of changes from COVID-19 and everything that we're going through, and hopefully some of them will be positive ones. I think of some elderly folks that still want to have animals with them, but necessarily, they're not driving, or they can't get around as easily as they could have at one time. So maybe some telehealth is a good idea.
Absolutely.
And the other thing too is, as you had said, that there's a decrease and in the pets that are being adopted, that is part of a domino effect. I think you would agree that if those aren't being adopted out from the shelter, it's hard for the shelter to accept any new ones in because there is always limited space. The shelters up here are really wonderful, but there's limited space, and that's just the way it is. So, yeah. And how can people help?
Yeah, and I think too, in particular right now with COVID, because it's impacting people, the other thing the shelters have to plan for is that, let's say the local shelter could normally handle 100 animals. If half of their staff gets sick from COVID, they can't fill their shelter the way that they used to because they won't have enough people to care for the animals. And
of course,
so our number one guidance to animal shelters, which is coming from veterinary experts in shelter medicine and the animal control world, is shelters right now should really only be taking in truly emergency related situations. And then everything else, helping pet owners navigate how can we keep those pets in your home or keep those pets in the home of a family member or a friend right now.
Yes.
And the best way that people can help right now is to foster an animal. And for a lot of people, like we saw, the statistics showed that we saw about 150% increase over last year in fostering over the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
Nationally, there are tens of thousands of animals that made it out into foster homes, which is great.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yep.
And that's a whole pool of people in the community who maybe had thought about fostering before, but now that they're home, they think it might be easier to get used to the concept. And then if you can't foster, or even if you can, and you're financially in you have the ability to do so, which is certainly not everybody right now. A lot of the nonprofit community is losing so much in donations because they weren't able to do some of the fundraising events that they had planned. So giving a donation to your local shelter right now would mean a whole lot to them if you're able to do that.
Yes, exactly. I think people need to be a little creative these days too. And what can they do? So a lot of individuals have fundraisers and things like that. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we all need to put our brains together and think of ways that we could do that safely. Whether it's, a girls' night and everyone donates, $5 or something, but it's a group of people and they decide over a cocktail who that's going to, so there's ways that we need to be creative these days to help how we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Thank you for giving your information and expertise.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's a challenging time for literally everyone. And I see it, through the lens of the animal sheltering community in my work. But, there's almost no, other than the human health first responders, there's almost no other category of professionals that's like uniquely positioned to navigate this, because we're so used to, in the animal sheltering world, we're used to disease, we're used to protocols, we're used to helping people. So I have faith we're going to figure this out.
I do too. And we have, especially for the animals, we have people like yourself and some others that we know that are doing great things, and keeping us all informed of those things. We do, we love our pets, and we need our pets in days like this. So we need to help others too where we can. Lindsay, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I would just add that, the CDC is still your best resource for all things COVID-19, including pet
Can
protocols.
you speak to that? Do you know what the latest is? I know it had flip-flopped for a while about pet protocols. Yeah.
So it is changing every day. So make sure you check the CDC website. But the shelter veterinarians that are out there are coordinating with CDC to make sure that we've got the most up-to-date protocols. And really what we know is that there has been no evidence at this point that pets can give us the virus, but there has been a very small portion of cats and dogs, literally 3, who seem to have gotten COVID-19 from us. So
Really?
zero proof that our cats and dogs can give it to us, but
Okay.
a small sample size that we might be giving it to them.
Interesting.
So the recommendations right now are to have a plan for your pets. So that might mean if you're in a household with other people, you would follow the normal recommendations that you would quarantine yourself in a part of your house away from the rest of your family members and include your cats and dogs in that.
Well, that's going to be hard. Yeah.
I know. So don't bring your pup into the bedroom where you are quarantining, as hard as that is. You can FaceTime.
That is hard. Yes.
FaceTime with your dog. And then if you live alone, then either have a plan that somebody would, like if you have a normal pet sitter or whatnot, talk to them now about whether they would come and stay at the house while you were quarantined in another room, or if you're going to send your pets to somebody else for that period of time.
Yes.
And worst case scenario, your local shelters are there to help you, but we want to avoid that at all costs because your pets are going to be safer going to somebody else or staying in your house with you when you're positive.
Exactly.
The risk to your pets is super, super low. It's just an abundance of caution that we essentially quarantine for 14 days away from our pets if we were to get sick. And that's with a positive test. So not just like you were sick and you weren't sure, but like if you have had a positive test, that's when those protocols come into play.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. I remember reading early on that, by petting your dog, if you had the virus, that you were spreading, and the next person pet the dog, that by petting the dog, that germ would be on their fur, and the next person petting it then would pick it up. I don't believe that is really what is going on.
Yeah, that's one of the guidelines they've changed. So originally they were like, your dog is like your cell phone. Like if you're touching it and other people touch it, then it can serve as a fomite. And the CDC last week changed that. So they do not think there's a risk on that anymore. It's more about being in direct contact with your cat or dog when you have a positive test that they're a little bit worried about.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for clearing that up. I know a lot of people that has been a concern, so we appreciate that. Mm-hmm. So, Lindsay, all right, time of the show. What is your snout out today?
So my snout out is to the Pope Memorial SPCA, which is in Concord, New Hampshire.
Yes, we love them.
We love them. And I am a volunteer there and a foster parent for them. And they just do really amazing work. So I want to do a shout out to them.
Excellent. We will have all the links in the show notes. Bud and I have done a lot of work with them as well, and they are just such a wonderful group, wonderful people, just very, very giving of their time and their talents and their knowledge. I couldn't say anything nicer about them. So we'll have all that information for folks to look at. Lindsay, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And I have a feeling we'll be talking to you again because you got a lot of stuff we want to talk about.
I would love to come back. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Dog Storytime Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a minute to leave a review. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss all the exciting episodes we have coming up soon. If you want to learn more about our podcast and Kimberly's work with dogs, head over to KimberlySarahPhotography.com. Thank you for listening.